Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Kickpoint Playbook webinar. I'm Dana DiTomaso, founder and lead instructor here at Kickpoint Playbook. And today I am answering all of your analytics questions. I have many questions that were sent in advance, and I'm also happy to take questions during the webinar. So if you have a question about analytics, anything at all, GA4, non-GA4 analytics tools, I have heard a rumor that they exist. Google Tag Manager, Looker Studio, ads conversions, whatever you're stuck on, ask away. There are no silly questions. There are no stupid questions. Everyone's analytics level of knowledge is different, and I am excited to see some of the questions come through today. So please ask away. Now, let's get things rolling. Remember, ask whatever questions you have in the comments. I have people watching the comments so we can star some of the questions, and then I'm going to show them on the screen as I answer them. The other thing, too, is that yes, this is recorded. So if you have to jump off early after your question's been answered, that's totally fine. We're going to email everyone who's registered a copy of the webinar as well as a resource from me. And in the resource, I'm going to include everything that I talked about, as well as any links to supplemental resources, because based on the questions I've already seen through, there's definitely some extra stuff that I'm going to want to point people to at the end of this. All right. So first question, let's get into it. The first question that we have today is from Kyle. Kyle wants to know, can engagement rate be applied to a page? I see people doing this in reports, but engagement rate seems to be a session-based metric. You are correct, Kyle. Engagement rate is a session-based metric. And what we mean by that are scopes. So if people aren't familiar with the idea of scopes, Universal Analytics had them as well as GA4 scopes. The scope is the scope, the type of data that's applied. So for example, if you're thinking about something like someone's user ID, that's at a user scope as it applies to everything that user had. Something like a landing page, it only happens once per session. So that's a session scope. And then there's individual things that are event scoped. And those are things like, say, individual page views. Multiple of that could happen in a session. So one mistake I see a lot of people making in GA4 reports is they will take something that is an event scoped dimension, something like a page view, and then they will apply a session scoped metric to it, like engagement rate. The problem with this is that GA4 will give you a report, but what it will show is it'll say average of this metric is 0. And that means that you have a scope mismatch issue. What has to happen is that the dimension has to be the highest scope. And then the metrics that are attached to that dimension, by dimension, I mean, say, the page that was viewed or the channels that people got to the site, the text-based stuff, and then the metrics are the numbers. So when we're thinking about, say, individual pages, those are event scoped dimensions. And then that means that you should only have event scoped metrics when you're reporting on that as a dimension. Now, if you're reporting on landing page, that's a session scoped dimension. So you can have engagement rate there because that is a session scoped metric. And if you are not sure what are session scoped and event scoped, let me show you. So I'm just going to pop on one of my favorite resources. Let me go into this view and I'm going to remove the brand so that you guys can see this. All right. So what this is one of my favorite websites, because I'm a nerd and I have a favorite website for GA4. It's data.ga4spy.com. It's a fantastic resource. And what's listed here are all the dimensions and metrics that are available in GA4. And for any of them, you can see what the scope is of that. So if I look at, say, engagement rate, let's find it here. Oops, it helps if I spell it right. So if I look for, say, engagement rate right here is a session metric, and you can see here the scope is session scoped. So this is a really handy resource so you can check on different things and say, is this session scoped or event scoped or user scoped? And then that can help you figure out what can you actually measure this with. So again, if I look at, say, page, as in page path, let's find that here. So we have page path, and you can see this is an event scoped dimension. But then if I look at landing page is a session scope dimension. So keep in mind, there's 3 different scopes. There's user, there's session, and there's event. User's at the top, then there's session. So a user scope can have 1 or more session items into it, and then session, and then event. And so a session scope can have event items in it, but you wouldn't attach user items to session scope. And then event scope, you wouldn't attach session scoped items to user scope dimensions. So Something to keep in mind when it comes to engagement rate. I find this is one of the things that people really get mixed up with when it comes to GA4. So I hope use this resource. It will really help you. Again, this URL is data.ga4spy.com. Okay. So next question. Let's see. And don't forget as well, you can ask questions right now in the chat and we will definitely answer them as we go through. Okay, next question is from Shatha. Why is the data in the standard reports different from the data in exploration reports? Well, that is also a great question. And so there's several reasons why. And Google, of course, has a help article about why data is different between reports and explorations. But um, it really is going to depend based on where you see it. And again, there's also the third option, which is BigQuery, and your data is going to look even different in BigQuery. One of the major reasons is that what you see in reports in GA4 is aggregated. It has been processed by Google. And what you see in explorations is a little bit less processed. There's also different dimensions and metrics that are available in explorations versus what's available in your standard reports. Plus, filtering works differently in reports and explorations. In reports, if you do a search or a filter, it's really basic and you can get a lot more detailed in explorations, which means you might end up with slightly different data because the filter's acting in a different way. As well, don't forget that in analytics, one really critical thing that you do have to do, and I'm just going to again share my screen so I can show you this. So what we're looking at right now is GA4. Actually, let me show this side because I want you to go into the admin, which is down here at the bottom. And let me hide this question so you can actually see this on the screen. So down here in the admin is where I am right now. Put this question back up. And then I'm going to show you what I'm talking about here. So if you go into the section is data retention right here in the admin. Make sure that your data retention is set to, this is what you get by the default if you don't select anything else. So this is a default account that I've set up. I haven't changed any of these settings yet. When you go into data retention, you might see just 2 months here. Change that to 14 months and then hit save. If you leave it at 2 months, that means that you're only going to see 2 months worth of data in explorations. Your reports aren't affected. This is mostly for explorations. So definitely make sure to set that to 14 months. So that is another issue, is that you might just have more data in reports than you have in explorations because you're looking at a long time period, or the data retention period was only set to 2 months. If you're not sure which kinds of metrics and dimensions are available, of course, you can go back to my favorite website, data.ga4spy.com. And then here in this drop down, you can choose explorations or reporting pickers. So if I choose explorations, then it will filter everything that's shown on the screen by what's available in explorations. And one metric, for example, that I know is only available in explorations is exits. So if I search for exits, here's this metric here. I click on it to open it up, and then we can see that we have this set of checkboxes here, and then I can see that's available in explorations and as a custom insight, and that's it. Not Looker Studio, not API, not going to show up in BigQuery, not available in customizations. So why is it only available in explorations and as a custom insight? A little frustrating, to be honest. This is something that I feel like should be available in more places in GA4. But if you're feeling like, why is this metric not available? Checking this resource is a really fantastic way to see exactly where stuff is available. So I really do recommend checking this out. All right, let's move on to the next question here. So, all right. We have a question from Ashita. I would like to know what learning structure you recommend for someone who wants to offer GA4 audit implementation for e-commerce store owners. What are the first steps? Oh boy. Okay. So the first step is to actually do this information, actually do the work. That's the big thing, honestly, when it comes to learning GA4. Set up a GA4 account. It's free. Then set up GA4, even if for yourself as a test website. So not a lot of website builders out there like Squarespace or Wix offer GA4 integration without having to do a paid plan. So if you just want to play with it on your own, then one website builder that does allow you to add GA4 without you having to do anything else yourself is Weebly. And so I really do recommend making sure to check out Weebly and then set up your own GA4 account. Make sure to go in there and add in your GA4, and then you can certainly do your own testing with GA4. If I do this, what kind of events show up, etc. That's one of the easiest ways to learn, is to get in there and just start doing stuff. Then when it comes to e-commerce, I mean, you could also, if e-commerce is something where you really want to start offering audits for, you could also volunteer your time with a charity that has an e-commerce site. Maybe they sell merchandise, for example. So, for example, one pro bono website we just worked on is called World Ride, and they have an e-commerce website that was set up through WooCommerce. And so, working with a charity like that, where you can set up a website for them or help them with their analytics on their website and get that experience, is one really fantastic way to do this. Something else that I would recommend as well, and we have a resource on our website. I'm just going to load it up here so I can show you, is we also have our GA4 audit dashboard. Let's see. So for the GA4 audit dashboard, this is on the Kickpoint Playbook website. Again, we'll include this link afterwards. And then we have a video on how to go through it. And then here's the dashboard here. And this, by default, is just pulling in data from the Google demo data account, which actually is not very high quality data. So you can use this picker here to choose a different analytics account. And I have a whole page devoted to e-commerce. You'll notice that the date range by default is just set to 1 day. I did that so that I'm not, crushing your GA4 API limits to get into Looker Studio right away. You can certainly change this to the longer. So this is over 7 days. And then there's this whole e-commerce page here as well. So you can see if transaction accounts are tracked, is your shopping funnel accurate, do you have referral issues? So using an audit dashboard like this and attaching it to the charity or the test sites you've been working on, and then seeing if this makes sense, can really help you out to learn how this stuff works. So for example, this is the Google Mart shop. As I mentioned, their test data, ironically, is not very high quality at all. You'd think that Google would want to give us something nice to work with, but they don't. But I can see here, for example, that the item list name for their product lists is most of their click-throughs, actually all their click-throughs, I would say, yeah, this is wild, is item list name not set. So obviously that's a data quality issue to deal with. And so these charts should help you understand what's going on with GA4, specifically with e-commerce. This audit dashboard, as I mentioned, is on our website. It's totally free, Looker Studio report. And if you have some things that you check that are outside of the scope of this report, let us know, and I'm happy to revise it to change this. But you can also click on the 3 dots here and then click make a copy of this dashboard, and then customize it for your own experience as well and what you need to use on the site. So definitely check out that GA4 audit dashboard. Okay, hopefully that's helped. And then I think we have a couple of comments that have come in. So first one from Ahmed. If we have many properties, is there a way to filter reports by property name and be able to see different metrics for each in Looker/GA4? Well, if you want to see multiples at the same time in Looker Studio, then you need to think about doing some data blending. So if I, for example, wanted to see all the sessions from multiple sites at the same time, then I would absolutely have to go in and do data blending in Looker Studio. And by blending, I mean that I'm showing multiple things at the same time, and I'm pushing this data together. Now, if you only need to show one at a time, then actually, if I just go back to the property we're just on, you can use what's called, and I'm just going to edit this dashboard so I can show you what the name of this particular control is. So this is, you click on add a control, and then you add in a data control. And then for the data control, you would choose GA4, and then you can flip between any GA4s that you have access to in the account where you're using that particular dashboard. So that is a convenient way to switch between different ones. So if there's like a common report that you look at all the time and you just want to flip between different, say, even ads accounts or analytics accounts and see how things are going, you could do that as well. That's what I would suggest if you just need to look at different stuff. And so again, if you look at this audit dashboard, you can make a copy of this as well and see how we set stuff up. I don't mind people taking a look and seeing how we set up our reports. So again, you click the three dots here and make a copy. And then you can choose, again, you would go to add a control, data control specifically. And then from here, you can choose, there's lots of different options for the data. Obviously, they're all Google properties. Google's not going to give you a data control for something that isn't theirs, but you can flip between different GA4 accounts and try some different stuff out. Okay. Hopefully that answers your question. If you have more follow-ups based on what I just said, definitely make sure to leave notes in the comments. All right, question from Aditi. Which hosting provider and website builder would you recommend for someone who wants to set up a blogging website? Future aspirations to become an influencer. So a testing website to attract analysts and improve your reach to brands. So this is a really interesting question. I'm going to put my website developer hat on because if people don't know, originally when I first started in this field way back in 2000, which was, forever ago, I actually was making websites. So I do have that website developer experience, which is why I ended up in SEO. I'm a way better SEO and analytics person than I was a website designer. Trust me. Um, I would say that what hosting provider website you build or you choose is kind of up to you and your own experience level. If you want to play around with code, then, if you want to get really into it, then picking something like WordPress might be the best choice for you because you can really get in there and like fool around with stuff. But if you just want a basic web builder where you can drag things around, you don't need to think about it. And, e-commerce is not the main focus of the website, then something like Wix or Squarespace would be a good choice for sure. I would try out trials of both and see which editor you like. I think it comes down a little bit to personal preference. I think Wix is slightly better when it comes to SEO. I know, for example, Crystal Carter and other people on the Wix team really think a lot about SEO. So from an SEO perspective, I think that Wix does have slightly the upper hand there. But it does come down to personal preference. And I would say that Weebly, which is the builder that I mentioned, because you can put GA4 on it for free, it's not great in terms of a builder. I only really recommend it because you can put GA4 on there for free without having to get a paid plan. So certainly, I would say that trying out, the different builders and seeing what you want to do. If code is not your jam and you're not going to be selling stuff online, then using a website builder like Wix is going to save you a lot of pain and suffering over something like WordPress. WordPress is really developer heavy. And I think that certainly it's something where people are like, well, you have to use WordPress. No, you don't. Tools like Wix are great with SEO. You don't have to use WordPress to have an SEO friendly website. Certainly you can use something like Wix. And then again, this is where if you have a paid plan with Wix, you can set up a GA4, Google Tag Manager, everything else you need to, and then be able to preview reach to brands. So that's what I would say recommend. And then overall, I think too, the pricing with Wix, when you think about like paying for any WordPress and any plugins you're going to need, plus the hosting costs, and who we recommend, by the way, for web hosting. If you are hosting WordPress, we use WP Engine, which is a fantastic host. And I'll certainly share a link to that as well in the resource afterwards. But I would say, it is a lot of work, and Wix probably ends up being cheaper at the end of the day. Even if it might look more expensive on its face and you think, oh, I just have to pay for hosting, just go with something easier if you don't want to play around with all that code stuff. All right, next question, also from Aditi. Which e-commerce options do you recommend for a website and businesses being planned in Canada? So, Shopify. I mean, it is Canadian, first off. Shopify is based in Ottawa. I would say honestly that Shopify does have the upper hand in a lot of e-commerce stuff. Certainly, I would say the other big player when it comes to e-commerce is WooCommerce, which is a plugin for WordPress. One thing that Shopify does not do well is they don't handle non-e-commerce content well. So if a blog is a really important part of your overall acquisition process, then Shopify might not end up being the right choice for you just because it doesn't necessarily do like non-shop content really well. But again, like this is where I would try different things out. They all have trials, see what works best for you. Definitely do some reading about the downsides of SEO with Shopify before you go ahead and decide if SEO as a non-product SEO is a huge important thing for you, then Shopify might not be the best choice. But then you're getting into something like WordPress, and other sites too. Wix, for example, has a shopping cart. Squarespace has a shopping cart, but they don't feel necessarily as focused on this is the shopping experience the way that a purpose-built tool like Shopify does. And we work with several clients who have Shopify. It's easy to set up. Shopify has conversion data from millions of websites to rely on. People have Shopify logins, and because Shopify logins extend across the ecosystem, if I've signed up with one Shopify site, then I can reuse that login for another site, and then it just pulls in my information. So Shopify does have a bit of the upper hand there when it comes to that kind of information. So I would definitely keep that in mind. Okay. Then let's see. Let's go into the next question then. This one is from Katarina. Katarina would like to know how to translate detailed granular info into something digestible for clients to understand. That is kind of the holy grail, isn't it, of reporting, is how to take that detailed info into something digestible for clients. I think the biggest thing that you need to think about when it comes to reporting for clients, and I speak this as someone who's worked in an agency, like my entire marketing career has been agency side. I've never worked in house. So I would say the biggest thing for clients is they just want a single answer. And I think that certainly if you're getting, if you're just starting out in this reporting and analytics or agency world, you might feel like, well, I got to present a lot of things because I want the client to know that I've been working on a lot of stuff. But we're not getting paid by the pound when it comes to reporting. Sometimes less is more. And I would recommend by starting with a report that is more, relaxed in terms of the amount of information that you present. Lots of white space. You don't need to cram stuff in all the time. Give the eye somewhere to rest and also provide lots of explanation. So even if I go back to, which I still have open here, the GA4 audit dashboard, of course, this is an audit dashboard, so I'm explaining different items, but we provide this level of explanation in reports we provide to clients as well. And that's because we know the client isn't necessarily going to be looking at the stuff every day or every week. They're not necessarily going to remember why we included something or what that means. And so if you can provide what we call microcopy in reporting, that can go a long way towards explaining to a client, this is why I'm showing you this, and this is what you should take away from this. And I think something to think about as well is when you create a reporting element, think about what will this reporting element show and will it inspire action? Positive or negative action. So, for example, if you just have a table of, say, sessions by channel, what's the takeaway going to be from that? And I think that that's a really common table that a lot of people start with in their reports. And certainly it's all over, say, Google's demos in Looker Studio. But what is someone supposed to take away from a sessions by channel report? Like, here's some traffic. It came from different places. Congratulations. But that doesn't necessarily inspire you to take action. So, really thinking about what is the action that I want someone to take after they view this particular chart, whether it's, hey, you're doing a great job, keep it up. Here's your, I'm going to pay your bill right now. That's still an action that you would want someone to take. So maybe it's, showing the volume of, if you're working with them in an SEO perspective, it's showing the volume of SEO traffic that's coming to the site that is turning into a lead or a sale or whatever, their primary metric is. And if you're working with clients, say, on the paid side, exactly the same thing. You're bringing in traffic. Is it doing the thing that you want it to do? And sometimes, we're not perfect. Sometimes campaigns or SEO tactics or whatever they might be don't exactly go the way that you expect them to. And when that happens, you have to be honest with the client as well. Don't create a report to try to hide, something bad and be like, well, this didn't do as well as we wanted it to, but I'm going to show this information instead. Don't do that. I think being honest is one of the real hallmarks of what builds a really great client relationship. And that means being honest when things are good and being honest when things are bad. Because unfortunately, the barrier to becoming a digital marketing agency is a laptop, which means that anybody can set this stuff up. Anyone can say that they're an expert in this stuff. There's no tests, there's no certifications. I mean, Google has some, but you can Google the answers. It's not like there's a huge barrier to entry in our field, unfortunately, which means there's a lot of bad people out there who aren't providing great services. And so if a client has worked with someone and already spent a whole bunch of money on someone bad, you already are in that kind of way where they aren't trusting you. So by being honest when things aren't going well, I think that can really, provide that level of trust for a client. There's also a great book called The Speed of Trust that I recommend giving a read. Another great book as well is Selling the Invisible, which talks about where we sell stuff that doesn't exist, like digital marketing services, and how to approach that. And those are both classics for business books if you haven't read those ones before. So I cover the stuff. I could probably do an entire webinar about, dealing with clients because, again, over 20 years doing this and lots of different weird client situations have come my way. I definitely talk about this more in the course Analytics for Agencies because it is focused on agencies and providing that client relationship. But the biggest thing is just, being honest, really focusing on what matters. And the last piece of advice I have to give you is that if a client says, I care if my phone rings, don't put phone call conversions in the report. put in the question, is your phone ringing? And then answer that question, yes or no. And this is how often your phone rang. And by using the client's own words in the reports you provide them, can really help kind of eliminate that barrier between the nerd talk that you have and, them just worrying about whether or not their phone's ringing. And it's a really good way to start off a relationship, especially with a new client when you're in that honeymoon phase. Just respect the kinds of words that they're using and repeat that language back to them in the reports that you provide. So I hope that that was a helpful answer for you. All right, bunch more questions have come in. Aditi has a follow-up question. So, following up to the blogging website question, would Wix allow customization for infographics? I also want to earn from ads in the blog, so is Wix still the best option? I'm not 100% sure about Wix allowing, it's called Google AdSense. Normally, if you're doing the Google Display Network on your site, I would double check. I would just do some Googling and see if that's an option. And then customizations for infographics. Yeah, because infographics are just embedding an image on the site. So, certainly you would be able to do that on a Wix website. Okay, next question is from Saeed. BigQuery or third-party tools like Analytics Canvas, which one is better to serve the customer? Use Analytics Canvas for generating queries and storage. Use BigQuery. Is this a good approach? Yeah, Analytics Canvas is a great tool for sure if you don't want to get into BigQuery and fool around with, SQL and learning SQL. I do think it is good if you are going to be working in BigQuery to have at least a base level knowledge of SQL. And there are courses actually on LinkedIn Learning if you have access to that. And if you don't have a paid LinkedIn membership, but you have a library card, a lot of libraries around the world have free access to LinkedIn Learning. So check that as well to see if you can get access there. And there's lots of good courses on using SQL and BigQuery on LinkedIn Learning. They're totally free with your library card, and you can get started that way. So in terms of serving the customer, I don't know. Using BigQuery really depends on is this going to make sense for the client? If I have a relatively small client, if I'm working with a one person pest control agency, BigQuery probably is overkill for what they need. You don't have to go to BigQuery, and they probably aren't going to care whether or not you're using BigQuery, and they aren't going to know what BigQuery is. So that isn't necessarily something that I think you really need to worry about is really pushing that BigQuery situation. Definitely something to keep in mind is that it's not the tool that you use, it's how you present the information. So don't feel that pressure that you have to use BigQuery. Now, Analytics Canvas is a tool that you mentioned. Analytics Canvas, by the way, has an excellent UA backup tool. I'm just going to pull up the URL for it so that people can see that as well. So Analytics Canvas, by the way, has this fantastic universal backup tool. If you have not exported your UA data, please do that. We're running out of time here, so you got to do that soon. But what Analytics Canvas does is it sort of provides a interface on top of your BigQuery data. So instead of having to write SQL, you can just drag and drop different fields. So it is a good tool from that perspective for sure, if that's what you want to use, but don't feel that you have to. Certainly the data in GA4 is good. And a lot of our clients, especially smaller clients, we don't need to use BigQuery for the kinds of reports we're providing them. We can just do that with the data that we already have available to us. So I don't want people to think that BigQuery is a must-have or must-use when it comes to GA4. Not everyone has a data scientist sitting underneath their desk who can do this kind of stuff for them. So don't feel that pressure to use BigQuery. But that being said, regardless, I would recommend attaching BigQuery to GA4 just to back up your data. Just do that even if you don't think you're ever going to use it. It's only going to cost you pennies to go ahead and save that. As long as you don't access it, you start paying once you do access the data. But for storage alone, it's not going to cost you very much at all. And I strongly recommend setting that up regardless of the size of client, just in case you need it later. You don't want to go back and be like, wow, I wish I did that 3 years ago. So, Saeed, I hope that helps with your question. Okay, I have a long question here from Manju. We have implemented GA4 via GTM for our Magento-based e-commerce websites. Ooh, Magento. I'm sorry. I've worked with the Magento websites before. They're tough, especially with SEO. We have e-commerce reports, but almost 40% of transactions are missing from the reports in the GA4 dashboard. We check for consent. That's not an issue. The Magento platform is sending the purchase event for the missing transactions, but the data isn't captured in GA4. Add JS blockers don't seem to be the issue either, since we also have the JS for the CDP. Interesting. Okay. So what is happening here? Let me break this down. You have a Magento website. You're using GA4. Now, I am going to say that Magento is now owned by Adobe. You might want to look at customer journey analytics for Magento. I'm only suggesting that because customer journey analytics is Adobe's analytics platform. and they own Magento. The two of them should work together well. So that is a possibility. I mean, there's other analytics products other than GA4 out there, I've heard. So this could be part of the problem. Okay, but 40% of transactions missing the reports. Of course, my immediate reaction when you say 40% of transactions are missing is say, it's obviously ad blockers, because a recent study showed that about up to 60% of, let's say, I think it was 52% of Americans now use an ad blocker. And that number goes up to 66% if you're talking to people who work in the marketing field like us. We don't want to track ourselves. No, we just want to track other people. So that's my immediate response. But you say that it isn't actually a ad blocker. I would be skeptical that it isn't actually an ad blocker, because if you're seeing data still show up in this CDP, customer data platform is what that stands for, Bloomreach, but you're not seeing people show up in GA4, it may be that they're using an ad blocker that blocks GA4, but not your customer data platform. It's entirely possible, because not all ad blockers recognize all tracking scripts. So it may be that issue. And some CDPs, I can think of, for example, RudderStack, so this customer data platform, does have a check on whether or not someone is using an ad blocker. Or what you can do, if you have developers on hand, which you must if you're using Magento, you can actually use a PHP script to insert what would look like be an advertising pixel on the page, and then you can see if the browser refuses it or not, and then you can see if there is an ad blocker installed in that browser. The other issue you might be running into, yeah, I would look and see if it's something to do with like the browser specifically. This is where I would look at my reporting first. Is there the same drop in terms of transactions across the board when it looks at operating system? When I look at browser, is it the same across all platforms? And if so, then, obviously it's something that's site-wide and isn't something that's related to ad blockers. But if I'm seeing, for example, that like I'm more likely to drop transactions on Safari than I am on Chrome, then I might see that there's an issue going on. That's where I would start with that. And you say that you checked consent and that's not an issue. I would also check that, because if someone says no to tracking, they can't hide that they bought something. They would still show up in the back end of Magento as a purchase, but they would not show up in GA4. So if someone says no to tracking and you're still tracking them in GA4, and I don't just mean like the modeling that GA4 has available, like if you're tracking them and sending stuff off to ads and stuff, you can't do that. So again, this could be a combination of consent. It could actually be ad blockers. I would dig into those options a little bit more and see if that helps you out or not. That is a tricky problem though, for sure. All right, I have another one here from StreamYard doesn't allow me to show names all the time. So what are some of the major changes you've noticed in conversion tracking Microsoft Ads in the last year since the GA4 transition, particularly lead gen clients? Have you found any latest best practice? Yeah, the GA4 transition should not have impacted what you were doing for Microsoft Ads tracking, because Microsoft Ads tracking is independent of what's going on in GA4. So what I would suggest is that you want to make sure that you're tracking ads. You want to make sure that you're tracking Microsoft Ads through Google Tag Manager. That's where your Microsoft tags should be living. And there shouldn't have been any changes there. The only change I can think of with ads is that Microsoft did start deploying Clarity automatically on sites. And I found that if you didn't have Clarity running through a separate tag, if you had it like automatically piggybacking onto your UAT tag, for people who don't know, that's the tag for Microsoft Ads, it can slow down the deployment of that tag significantly. So you may have seen instances where, someone did manage to actually fill out a form, or, just view the page, and that information wouldn't have made it into Microsoft Ads because that tag took so long to trigger, because it's loading up this huge Clarity library, and Clarity is pretty heavy on websites. So something to keep in mind for sure is there shouldn't have been any real changes in terms of Microsoft Ads tracking with regards to GA4. But yeah, for the best practices, use the UAT tag always. Just follow Microsoft's ways of setting it up. And then in terms of deploying it, if you're deploying via Google Tag Manager, one practice I always recommend is that have one trigger for multiple tags. Don't have a trigger, so let's say it's a form fill. So you have a trigger for a form fill that would then send the data off to GA4 and Facebook ads and Google ads and Microsoft ads. Don't have a trigger for Microsoft ads form fill, a trigger for Google ads form fill, a trigger for GA4 form fill. You just need one trigger and then multiple destinations, and then at least you're eliminating one source of possible, disagreement between your different tools. It was at least the same trigger that sent data off to the different places. The last place that I would check would be in your attribution settings. Make sure that your attribution settings in GA4 are set the same as your attribution settings, your attribution window in Microsoft Ads. And I'll just show where to do that in GA4. So you would check that under, it's under data display, and then it's under attribution settings, which I'm just going to hide this question so you and myself for a moment so you can see. Oh, hang on a second here. I've got a banner showing. Let me just remove that. Okay, there we go. So we're going into attribution settings, which is down here. And then check your attribution model. So make sure, if it's last click, because obviously data-driven is not going to make it into Microsoft Ads. So if it's important for things to match up as much as possible, data-driven is probably not the choice you might want to pick, for example, in GA4. And then check, what you have set up here, and then look at your acquisition key events. So if this is set to 7 days and 60 days, for example, and that doesn't match what you have in Microsoft Ads, that could certainly be part of the problem that you have coming in. So again, you can check that in the admin, data display, attribution settings. Check these settings, see how they match up with what you're seeing in your Microsoft Ads settings. Okay. Next question. Can I share from Aditi, can you share some of the names of the books you mentioned when you share resources? Absolutely. I will definitely make sure to mention that. All right. And then last follow-up from Saeed. Even though a small e-commerce store facing issues like cardinality, thresholding, data retention, data delay in GA4, what to do in such case? Yeah, so let's go through each of these different issues individually, and I'll explain what each of them mean for people who aren't familiar. The first one is cardinality. What does that mean? So in GA4, and again, I will share the screen here. When you're in your custom definitions and you can create custom dimensions for things like different events that are coming into the site, you'll see here there's this warning that if you create a custom dimension with a high number of unique values, that could negatively impact your report. So for example, if you pick a custom dimension that is based on something that could have up to 500, more than 500 unique values in a day, you're going to end up with a warning of something called cardinality. And certainly, that means that what's going to happen is your data is going to be grouped under other. It doesn't necessarily mean the data isn't there. It's still there. It just is grouped under others. So for example, if thinking about an e-commerce website, if I, for some reason, had transaction ID as a custom dimension, which I wouldn't necessarily do that. It is already a built-in dimension. You don't need to make that a custom dimension. But if you did that, then you would probably see that information show up, under an other own GA4, but it doesn't impact the data that you see. So I don't necessarily think cardinality is necessarily a huge issue, and you can always go into explorations as well for that. Thresholding is no longer an issue in GA4, and thresholding was an issue. I'm just going to go into the admin, and I'm going under reporting identity. Thresholding was an issue before when we had Google Signals that was applied to what we saw in reports in GA4. Google Signals, for people who aren't familiar, is where, for example, I'm on my desktop, I'm on my phone, I'm logged into Google in both cases. Google Signals would allow Google and thus GA4 to track me across those devices. But for privacy reasons, Google would hide some of the data that was shown in GA4 for users that had Google Signals. And so if you had a reporting identity that was anything other than device-based, which is what I have selected here, previously, I think this was changed in March, you would have seen a thresholding error in your reports. That is no longer a problem. Of course, if you go back past March, thresholding is still going to apply, but from March forward, you should not have an issue anymore when it comes to thresholding. And you can always change your device identity, your reporting identity to device-based, which would remove that problem entirely. So if you don't have user logins on your website, you're not really getting anything from blended or observed anyway. Device-based is probably the best option for you. And when it says user ID, this isn't, I'm a user in my browser. It has to be me logging into your website. Otherwise, you're looking at the device ID. So really keep that in mind. Thresholding, not as much of an issue as it used to be. It used to be a huge problem in GA4 for sure. Then data retention. I mentioned that as well. Data retention is only an issue for explorations. It is not an issue for standard reports. But again, if you're exporting everything to BigQuery anyway, so I think, Saeed, you mentioned earlier about using Analytics Canvas, not necessarily going to be an issue. And then the data delay. Yeah. So the data delay in GA4 is a big one. GA4 takes up to 48 hours, allegedly, to process data. And so that means that, for example, I see this all the time. We get a notification, someone's bought a course on KP Playbook. Very exciting. Go into GA4, totally have no idea where that person came from until the next day, or maybe even 2 days later. And in some cases, Google has actually changed attribution data up to 7 days after the original visit. So it takes a while for GA4 to process stuff, for sure. Um, and so it's just like you just gotta be patient, unfortunately, or switch to a different analytics tool because some other analytics tools don't have these processing delays. So if the data delay, if you need to know like right away where sales are coming in from, then maybe GA4 isn't the best option for you, to be honest, just because of that data delay. And maybe another analytics tool is going to be the right one for you. So cardinality will only be an issue if you register some weird custom dimensions. Thresholding no longer is an issue. Data retention, make sure that's set to 14 months, but it only is an issue in explorations. And data delay, yeah, that sucks. So hopefully that has answered your questions about what to do about these issues in GA4. All right, next question is from Cindy. I know I shouldn't use UTMs to track internal links. No, you should not. What is the best way to track clicks on primary navigation ads promotions that change every month? Okay, so why, Dana, you might ask, can't I use UTMs on internal links? I mean, you can use them in GA4, still don't though. So here's what the issue was in Universal Analytics and why you should never use a UTM on an internal link in your website. And this is more of a problem in UA than it was in GA4, but I'll explain in a moment. So in Universal Analytics, when you get onto the website, you have your source medium of Google Organic or whatever set when you come to the website. But then if you have an internal link on your website and that had a UTM attached to it of, say, banner click or whatever it might be, then your original session was going to end and then a new session would start with that UTM that would say, this is now a lead from referral banner. And the problem is that you would have to go into multi-touch attribution to be able to see this person originally came in via organic because it would just look like a brand new session that started from whatever your internal UTM was. Now in GA4, if someone comes back to the site during an active session and they change their session, so you have a UTM and someone clicks that, the session no longer ends. You don't have that session that ends and a new session starts. But that being said, that does not mean it's still okay to use UTMs for internal links. I don't recommend that. Certainly, if you need to track primary navigation clicks as promotions that change every month, there's a few different ways I would recommend doing this. All of them do involve Google Tag Manager, so hopefully you have that available to you on your site. The first thing that I would recommend would be make it a little e-commerce-y if you want. Even if this isn't an e-commerce site, there's nothing saying that you can't use the e-commerce events that are available to us. There's no rules here that say you can't use this. So going back to the data.ga4spy.com, I've clicked on this events and parameters section here, which has a list of all the recommended events on the website. And so one of the things that you could pick would be a select promotion, for example, which signifies a promotion was selected from a list. You could just use this built-in event. And then when you're creating this event in Google Tag Manager, you would just use the same parameters that it's recommended here. So you have creative name, creative slot, promotion ID, promotion name, items, etc. And you don't have to include the items array, or you could build it if you want. But this idea would be, create an event like this when someone clicks on those individual ads or promotions. So I find the trick with things like this is figuring out how am I going to track exactly what was clicked on. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for one moment so I can load up a container. Can't let you see, all our client accounts, but I want to show you exactly something that we do on the Kickpoint Playbook website. And I'm just loading up our tag manager container now. Okay. So this is our Google Tag Manager account that's found on kpplaybook.com. And one of the things that we record on every single page of the site is if an image was viewed. And so I'll show you actually how I've got this set up. So let's say you're on a blog post here, like the new channel groups in GA4, for example. And we'll sort through here. Here's an image right here. So the trigger for this tag is just that an image is 100% shown on the page. That's it. That's all I'm recording. And then I'm creating an event. When that is viewed, I can create another event if someone clicks on the image, but I would start by creating a promotion viewed because you want to know if people actually saw the thing before you can see if people actually engage with the thing. And then for the event parameters for this event, I have the alt tag for the image and the URL of the image. And you'll see for the value of the URL, I have click URL. Click URL doesn't have to just be used when you click on something. It can be used for anything at all. So click URL is just available as the URL of the image, and then I'm saving what the URL was of that image, and then I can see exactly how far down the page people scrolled. So if you name your promotion images really well, so they're really clear, then you could actually use the name of that URL, that name of that image URL, to your advantage to be able to save that when it comes to promotions. And then I would do a really similar thing where you have a click trigger instead of a visibility trigger. And then the click trigger would also store the URL, the click URL. And then you could see if the image or the promotion was clicked on in addition to being viewed. And then you could even make a custom metric if you want a number of times, the image was viewed, the promotion was viewed versus number of times it was actually engaged with. But then by saving this as an event, you can also say create an audience of people who viewed a specific promotion and then seeing if they actually took action on that specific promotion. I think the key here is going to be really good naming schemes. So, don't name your images like, promotion May, final 3. You're going to want to name it whatever the promotion actually is. So that is clear for you when you're reporting afterwards. But this is how I would recommend approaching that, is in Google Tag Manager and using the click URL variable to be able to record what that image URL is. Then using a visibility trigger like this, or using a click trigger. So you would click on the actual link of that promotion and then be able to record that. So for example, let's see if I can find a resource card. So for example, if you click on cards on our site, so this is a resource post, we have a click class wrapped around any sort of resource, like related resource link on our site. So let me scroll to the bottom of the page here so I can show you what I'm talking about. All the way at the bottom. So any of these related resources, they have a class wrapped around them called wrapped link, hence the name. And so when you click on any of these related resources, I'm recording that you clicked on a resource card as a result of the click class of that wrapped link. So the important thing is like going into the code, seeing what is unique to that specific element that I can actually track. And then you should be able to track people engaging with your promotions instead of using UTMs, which you should not use ever internally on your website. UTMs are great. Just don't use them on your website. Please and thank you. All right. Follow-up question from Aditi. And then I'm going to take a drink. Apologies. Thank you so much for the great questions, by the way. This is fantastic. All right, question from Aditi. Which analytics tool do you recommend to avoid data delay? I don't have an answer for you. I think you're going to have to do some Googling for that. Other analytics tools that I've used are Fathom. And I'm pretty sure Fathom didn't have a data delay, but I would, again, I would Google this to be sure. I am talking off of my very fuzzy memory of using these other tools. And then Matomo is a really popular GDPR compliant tool that is actually, I think, taking a lot of people who are frustrated with GA4. I think they're gaining a lot of market share from that. So I would recommend taking a look at Matomo as well and seeing if there is something there that might be available without data delay. It's really going to depend on the analytics tool. I just have to say, keep in mind that what this is called streaming analytics. So this is analytics without delay. Streaming analytics is very expensive to generate. So you are probably going to have to pay if you do require those real-time analytics. If you're fine with waiting a few hours, then it's probably going to be less expensive. So just consider your actual needs. Like, are you actually going to do something based on knowing that someone clicked on, your ad from Facebook right away? Probably not. Unless you're a huge company, and even then, you're not necessarily responding to stuff in real time in that same way. So, if you have that big company budget, great. You probably look at a real-time streaming tool. If not, real-time streaming might be overkill for what you need. All right. Back into some more questions. Let's see. Trying to see where I left off. Sorry. Okay, so Michael asks, Michael wants to know, this is questions in advance. Michael wants to know workflow recommendations to export Google tags for one site and import to another site to create apples to apples reporting. Our company bought a company uses a different CMS platform. So if you're exporting Google tags from one site into another GTM container, and you want to make sure that it's set up relatively the same, the easiest thing to do here, and I'm just going to share my screen again so you can see Google Tag Manager, go into the admin, export that container. Here's all the information here, and then import that into whatever you need to, and then modify it. Just keep in mind that apples to apples across two different websites with two different CMSs might be really difficult. And you're going to need to consider, this is the class name that's wrapped around a related resource card on the CMS, but this is the class in this one. So you're going to have to change those as well. And sometimes as well, when we have clients that have multiple websites, and we are going to be tracking them even in, say, a similar GA4 or the same GA4 account with two different properties, sometimes we'll use the same Google Tag Manager account on both sites, but we'll actually have a hostname check. So if the hostname is this, then we'll make sure to run this set of tags. And if the hostname is that, then we'll run this set of tags. It's a little bit less maintenance for yourself because that means that you have everything in one place instead of having to flip between two containers. So if you make a change in one, you're going to, you might forget to make the change in the other container. And then the other thing you can keep in mind when it comes to apples and apples comparison between two different CMSs, JavaScript errors can mess with your analytics recording. It doesn't happen too often, but it is a possibility, especially on a site that might have tons of JavaScript errors. So one of the ways to check if your site does have any JavaScript errors at all is to, for any site at all, and I'm just going to load up, I don't know, just a random website here. And so hang on a second. I'm just going to share my screen in 1 minute, one moment here. So for any website at all, and I've just happened to go on The Verge because this is a site I use quite a lot. You can see here, I'm in the dev tools. So to get here, in case you don't know, you can right click and then choose inspect. And then click on console. And what you're looking for here are anything showing up in red. Any of these JavaScript errors can cause issues with analytics running properly because analytics is ultimately just JavaScript. So if something happens and JavaScript stops running or JavaScript crashes or there's conflicts between different JavaScripts because different CMSs, that can cause issues with analytics recording properly. So definitely something to keep in mind is that to make sure that you are setting stuff up properly and double checking those JavaScript errors. And there is actually a JavaScript error control that you can set up. And I'll just hop back into the Playbook Tag Manager container so I can show you this. I'll start with tags. So we have, we record this on the Playbook website. So we have a GA4 event called error JavaScript. And I record the error message, the error line, the error URL. This is based on built-in values. So this is just built-in variables that are in Google Tag Manager. And then for the trigger, all it's recording is if there was a JavaScript error. That's it. And so I find this a really useful diagnostic because actually I remember we had an example where on the websites on Google Playbook, on KP Playbook, you can see here this top button, which actually, no, you can't see because I've hidden it under the banner. One moment. Okay. So this top button right here down at the bottom right, when this was first added, we had an issue where it wasn't working properly and it was only firing on pages that had the button, which was on blog posts. We don't have those on other pages of the site because we just tend to write really long blog posts. The other pages are usually short enough that you don't need a slide a top button. Anyway, so when they were first applied, there was a JavaScript error that was firing. And what I saw in my diagnostic report for KP Playbook was that our error JavaScript events just went right through the roof. And then I was able to see this is the error line it's happening on. This is the message, able to pass it on to a developer so they could fix it right away. So I would say that if this is a concern for you, it might be valuable to have that kind of JavaScript error check. Just keep in mind that it could also capture some like random stuff that you don't care about. But if you see a sudden huge increase in JavaScript errors, and there's probably going to be like a baseline number of JavaScript errors because there's tons of different browsers that people use. Not all of them play with JavaScript properly. Beside the, obviously you could test things for Chrome and Safari and Edge, But then there's Firefox and there's Opera and there's, all these different browsers. There's Brave, and not all of them will necessarily process stuff in the same way. So just keep in mind that you might see an overabundance of errors in a browser that like 6 people use. Is that worth development time to fix? Probably not. But it can negatively impact your analytics measurement. So, and of course, if your JavaScript errors are really horrible, of course, your JavaScript error event won't record because it's something that's truly broken. So if your JavaScript errors like just disappear, your tracking disappears, definitely take a look at your JavaScript errors and see if that is a problem. All right, we are coming up to time, and I am coming up to losing my ability to talk. So I think I'm going to have to call it here. Thank you so much for all of your amazing questions that you have asked today. I really appreciate it. And I got a couple of stumped, so I really am excited about that, you definitely asked me some questions that I didn't know the answer to, which I love. So as I mentioned, I will be emailing out a resource later on today with all the questions that were asked, all the answers that I gave, and any supplemental links, because I know I showed you some screenshots and whatnot, but I'm going to include some links as well to explanation for this. And before we go today, I want to talk about our next webinar. Okay, that is going to be on June 18th. It is going to be with Claire Carlisle, who, if you haven't seen speak before, she is fantastic. She works with Bright Local. She's a local SEO consultant. And she knows her stuff. And she is going to be talking about metrics that matter in local SEO. And she has promised, and I quote, "All killer, no filler." So I fully expect a fantastic jam-packed session. You can sign up for that right now on the Kickpoint Playbook LinkedIn page. Just go check out our events and definitely make sure to sign up for that. And again, if you register in advance, even if you can't make it, we will email you out the video along with a resource post of some information that was shared during the webinar. And usually we include like a couple extras as well. So thank you for registering. If you did register for the webinar today, thank you so much. Watch your email for a special discount on all our Kickpoint Playbook courses, along with a replay and a list of questions that I covered today. And one last thing before I go, this is a new initiative that we're offering on Kickpoint Playbook, and it's something that I'm really proud of. And I want to make sure that the word gets out about this. So we are offering parity pricing for our courses. What this means is that if you live in a country that does not have a great exchange rate with the US dollar, so, for example, if you live in India, comparing, that to the US dollar, it's tough. So we actually offer a discount relative to the purchasing power of your country, which, for example, for India is 75% off our courses. And that way, we really want to make sure that it's equitable for people around the world to be able to take Kickpoint Playbook courses. There's no reason for us to hide this knowledge. We want to make sure as many people in the world, because digital marketing is not just an American or North American concern, it's everywhere. So please tell your friends about our parity pricing program. All you have to do is go on the website, kpplaybook.com/parity pricing, check and see if your country is here on the eligible list. We do ask for a piece of ID or mail, or like somebody sent through an invoice from buying some monitors. I'm not picky. We just want a little piece of information to make sure that you do actually live in the country you say you're living in. We delete it right after we verified that it exists. So we don't store it on our servers for more than, however long it takes for us to process your application. And then please fill out this form, just indicate your information, upload that file, and then we will get back to you with a coupon that you can use for the discount according to whatever discount your country requires. So I hope that helps more people be able to access our digital marketing education. Anyway, thank you so much for attending today. And I will be sending out that resource later on today. We'll see you back here on June 18th. Thanks so much.